What if bringing your manufacturing back to the US wasn't just a patriotic move, but a strategic one? Today, I'm talking with Samuel Fish, the owner of Shield Security Doors and Shield Metalworks, who made the bold decision to bring his manufacturing back from Eastern Europe to American soil. We dig into how who gives you advice and when they give it to you can change everything. If you've ever wrestled with global supply chains and rising costs, or where to build long-term, this conversation might challenge everything you think about your business. Stick around because the very first question I ask is probably the thing you've been avoiding. Is it really smart to manufacture in the USA? After years of manufacturing in Europe, why did you decide to move your manufacturing back to the US?
The biggest single reason for that was a principle that my father had always taught me, which was whenever possible, manufacture your product, produce your product where you sell it. And if you can follow that principle, you will never go wrong. That's a lot easier said than done. That's a lot easier said than done with a high value product like what I make, as opposed to something that costs $1. But at the end of the day, it was about manufacturing where you produce. And after a decade of manufacturing overseas, that going well sometimes not going well, and encountering all the problems that come along when it's not going well, I decided it was time to shift gears and move production back to the US from Eastern Europe.
How many years was it from when he told you that to when you actually made the change?
In 2019, with a previous supplier, things started unraveling really quickly. Effectively, the owner of the factory there was driving things into the ground for very complicated reasons. And as the main customer at the time, one of the main customers, I didn't have any control over what was happening. My father said to me at the time, if you want to be in this business long term, open your own factory in the US, find another company that you can buy and add your product as a new product line to it, but be in control. So the first time he told me that was in 2019. And when it finally came to fruition was late 2024. So just over 5 years.
The reason why I asked that question is because I've noticed that when I give people advice, it typically takes them time to digest it and then act on it. Everyone's different. But I also find that this happened to me with my last team, where I had a CTO, I had a product manager, I had a COO, I had a marketing director. And they would all give me advice. And sometimes I would take it to heart immediately and put it into action. And other times I would take time to realize. And sometimes it would take me hearing the same advice from someone I was interviewing a few months down the road to go, you know what, I should probably do that because now several people have told me to do it. And then when inevitably I realized that I should make that change and I put it into action, they'd go, why didn't you do this months ago, my team? And I had the same frustration with people that I was mentoring or advising. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that people are just mentally at different places. So maybe you were too afraid to make the move, or maybe you were too lazy to make the move. I don't know. What do you think was going on that made you kind of ignore that?
So I think it touches on two different aspects. One, like you experienced, the messenger matters. You can receive the exact same message from two different people. It's going to resonate coming from one, but not necessarily the other. So one, the messenger matters. Two, the timing matters. When my dad first told me this in 2019, I was not yet at a place confidence-wise to think I can do this on my own. I wasn't there yet. My father passed in 2020, but so fast forward to 2024, and I still had that advice that he had given me 4 years earlier, that I was at a place in 2024 where doing this wasn't as daunting anymore. It wasn't as intimidating. So it was a combination of those factors. I guess for you, it was the messenger really mattering. For me, my father was the best messenger. Just the timing of it wasn't there the first time around. But the advice still resonated 5 years later when it did matter and when I was ready to take that big step.
I think for me, the messenger part is like I valued those people. They were part of my team. Of course, I was paying their salaries. If I didn't like them, if I didn't trust them, they wouldn't be part of the team. But I think hearing the message from someone that was doing a 7, 8, 9 figure business annually, it meant more because they had experienced it. And so it was one business owner to another saying, hey, I've been there. I've done this. This is what happens if you don't make this change. And where the team member, they haven't run a business before. They've always just been somebody else's employee. So they're looking at it differently. And so it means more to me when someone who's also a business owner is saying it, because I can trust that they've lived it and it was probably painful. And if I continue to ignore it, it will continue to be painful for no reason.
Yep, absolutely. Spot on. You were getting the message from someone who you felt could relate to what you were going through and had already been through that tunnel once before and seen the light. So it resonated and it was much more persuasive than coming from an employee who sees one sliver of it, even though they might actually be reading the tea leaves really well, and that is a vote of confidence in them as people that you've hired. That they could act, even though they hadn't experienced it firsthand, they could see where the road would lead.
So you decide to finally take your father's advice and move the manufacturing over to the US. How long did it take from the idea to actually go through with it to the first line was starting to be produced in the US?
Total took 7 months, maybe 8 months. I made the decision, and it was all going back to 2019. It was almost 5 years later to the day that my new supplier, or my second supplier, started having their own very major issues. So it was almost 5 years to the day. And that was part of the reason why my dad's advice resonated so loudly in my mind, the timing of it. And from that point, from when I decided, like, okay, it's time to do this, let me jump in with both feet, until we were up and running at this new factory in North Carolina, was around 7 to 8 months, with a few fits and starts. But that was roughly the timeline. This wasn't planned out for 2 years and gradually phased in. It was a lot more of a hair on fire kind of situation. Like, I got to get this done right away because I have a ticking time bomb overseas and I don't know when that bomb is going to go off. So let me get this done as quickly as humanly possible.
Do you think it was a mistake to try to push that fast, or did something bad happen in the process of making this move?
No, it wasn't a mistake to push as quickly. If anything, with more foresight, I would have started the process earlier and done it somewhat more gradually. But the reality with my supplier overseas is that they were just no longer reliable, and the things orders weren't getting produced anywhere nearly on time. Employees weren't getting paid. Taxes weren't getting paid. It was a complete collapse. And I was having to prop them up financially. So I was having to take on all of the financial responsibilities, making sure that uh, giving them an unsecured line of credit to make sure that employees were getting paid or back paid, something, so that they wouldn't walk out. Because if they did walk out, well, then I'm really up a creek, because then there's no one left to produce anything, and I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't at the stage yet where I could start producing myself in North Carolina. So there was an interim period there where it was cheaper for me to take a big financial risk by giving them a blank check effectively, rather than rolling the dice and them potentially collapsing, and then I don't have a supplier any longer until I could bring my own factory online.
Was there ever a moment where you felt like the business was done?
Not this time around, but in 2019, yeah, there was. I think this was March 2019, and I was very much contemplating. I'd been doing this 6, maybe 7 years at the time, and it was my first time through the ringer. It was my first time seeing my supplier, who I'd relied on and who had been reasonably good up until then, just fall to pieces. And to give you an example of how bad things got, on one trip over there, I had to go around with my engineer and with another guy, and we went to all the suppliers, and I paid them cash. I was running to an ATM, taking out cash to pay these suppliers in Eastern Europe, so that we could bring back the materials, the raw materials needed, the wood, the glass, the steel, the locks, bring it back to the factory so that they could complete orders, because the suppliers weren't willing to deliver anything to them anymore because bills hadn't been paid in months. That time around, I very much thought, okay, maybe this is the end. What flipped the light switch for me is, in the midst of this, I had a call from a security agency for a foreign government. And we started a G7 country, and we started talking about projects for their government residences. And that was a wake up call to me, because just at the time where you're at your lowest of lows in terms of not knowing what the future is going to be, all of a sudden you get this amazing reminder and this amazing opportunity of, wow, this would be the most incredible project I've ever done. And that just reminded me that I've gotten somewhere over the last 6 years. I'm building towards something here, and I'm getting these calls right now about incredible projects. So that really helped. The timing of it couldn't have been better. That really helped fuel my confidence and my desire to keep going at that inflection point that easily could have gone the other way had there been more bad news at that point.
Are you still getting calls from these foreign countries? Because you're saying to manufacture where you sell, but if you have demand outside of the US and you're only producing in the US, then shouldn't you be manufacturing outside of the US as well to meet that demand?
So, yes, we still do work for foreign governments. Whether we were producing in Eastern Europe or we were producing in the US, oftentimes there's still foreign governments, because there are 179 other countries in the world, and here we're only talking about two. Um, so the export opportunities, however, that you're touching on, are more complicated right now, manufacturing in the U.S. in the current tariff environment that is much less of an issue manufacturing in Eastern Europe, where tariffs are not being imposed. So that's a big question as well, and it is hurting. The tariffs that the U.S. government has imposed on foreign countries, and foreign countries have imposed reciprocally on us as well. That's very much hurting export. But there's a little bit of it anywhere you go right now from the U.S. If we were still manufacturing in Eastern Europe, we'd be getting murdered on tariffs right now, and the volatility of tariffs and how that changes almost on a daily basis.
What is hurting me is earning dollars and living in Europe and spending euros, because a lot of people don't look at the daily or quarterly or long-term fluctuations of the dollar to the euro, or the pound to the euro, or the pound to the dollar, or the dollar to the Japanese yen, etc. But if you are working abroad or you're doing business with different countries, you start to notice those things when they are in your face. Because when I moved to Europe, it was like 98 cents to a dollar. And right now, €1 is $1.18. So everything is about 20 cents more expensive than when I got here. Plus, the economy of Portugal has had massive inflation as well in the last few years. So I'm being hit with all of this inflation and the devaluation of the US dollar. And so every time I use my American credit card to buy something, I have two options. Do I want to pay in USD or euros? Because I have a USD credit card. And I don't have a foreign transaction fee, so I can hit the euro button and I get charged a lower fee from the bank than the POS terminal would charge me. But seeing the conversion on the POS terminal makes me sick. It's like 10 or 15 cents more. It's like $1.26, $1.27. It's almost a pound. It's almost one GBP to a dollar based on these POS terminals. So I can't imagine what businesses are dealing with trying to buy things in, make things in dollars and then sell them to Europe, where they're like, I mean, I guess Europeans would be happy, right? Because their dollar is going further. Right? China does this as well, is devaluing their currency in order to make it more valuable for people to buy things from you. But
So the exchange rate. So if you go back almost exactly 24 months, I think it was summer 2023, the US dollar was on par, or there was a brief period where it was stronger than the euro.
yeah,
And that was amazing. But then the fluctuations, even just from a consumer standpoint, become noticeable. And from a business standpoint, that's what I've always looked at as one of the very significant soft costs of manufacturing overseas, because you have to factor in at some level those currency fluctuations, those exchange rate fluctuations that are going to affect your bottom line. At times they're going to help, at times they're going to hurt, but either way, you've got to build in some cushion in your margins that's going to lead to slightly higher prices on account of manufacturing overseas. If you're calculating this comprehensively, looking at all of the real costs and things that could affect your bottom line, this is one of them. And it's one that is often overlooked when we think about manufacturing overseas, when everything can look really rosy because it's 20% or 30% of the cost to manufacture overseas. But then you start adding up all these other little factors like exchange rate fluctuations, and it's not as amazing as it seems at first brush.
and VAT tax.
VAT tax, yes, but for export, you're typically exempt from it. So we never had to pay VAT on our orders on our exports, because if it's being exported, the government is happy, and the manufacturer gets the VAT back quarterly. I think it is. Probably varies in different countries.
So you didn't have to pay VAT to purchase those goods?
No, no, 22% VAT we didn't have to pay.
Okay, that's good. I was just talking with my accountant, and I had some things for my European company, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that gets taxed at 25%." And I was like, "Why?" And they're like, "Because it does." I'm like, "I didn't know that. If I knew that, I wouldn't have bought it." And they're like, well, now you know. They're like, you could always put the money back into the business in order to avoid the that. And I was like, yeah, but I don't want to put the money back into the business. It was profit.
It's a corporate version of, oh, someone goes to Europe on a trip, and as they're leaving, they go to the VAT office or they put the forms in the mailbox to get all their taxes back for high value items that they've purchased. It's the corporate version of that.
Yeah. I walk past the VAT return every time I go in and out of Portugal, and I never keep any of the receipts. And every time you buy something, they ask you, "Do you want to give us your NIF, which is the Portuguese ID?" And I was like, "No, I don't really want to do that because I don't want to tell you the number, and then you have to sit there and type it in. It's like an extra 30 seconds. I'd rather just not." And apparently, you can get refunds, but like I just don't want to deal with it, honestly. Because I'm like, what? It's like a few €100 every year. Like, do I really want to put? You have to keep the receipts, and then you have to show them the receipts. Like, I don't want to deal with that. So, what has been the most rewarding part of having your company in the US? Being able to say we're made in the USA.
Over the years, whenever I was on a sales call, a new project, about 50% of the time, maybe even more, customers would say, "Where's the stuff made?" And I would always open with, "Oh, it's made in Europe." Sounds pretty good. And then if they ask more, "Okay, where's it made?" "Well, it's made in Lithuania." Doesn't sound as appealing as made in Europe, but nevertheless, uh, for a lot of people, for a lot of American customers, it really mattered where it was being made. And not necessarily that it being made in Europe was a deal breaker. For some, it was. But at the time, there were no alternatives. No one else was going to answer the same call for the same type of product, custom product that they were looking for, and say, "Oh yeah, our doors and windows are made in the U.S." It didn't exist. There weren't any alternatives that could meet that criteria. So the most exciting parts of it, being able to answer that, and being able to answer that with a lot of pride, because these types of doors and windows that we make have never been made in the US. This is a very European style product. And as you know, most apartments in Europe, whether you're in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, is a steel door with a multi point lock on it and decorative skins to make them look like nice wooden doors, whether it's painted or stained wood, whatever. This is normal in Europe. It is very not normal in the US. People look at those types of doors here and go, "Wow, that looks like a bank vault." So, being the first ones to do this here is a great feeling. The other crazy part of it that I never predicted, but got very lucky, is our timing with regards to trade tariffs. We opened up shop in late 2024, and it was early 2025 that tariffs started being introduced. Had I been 3 months later, 6 months later, that would have hurt tremendously.
What are some of the other soft costs besides VAT, tariffs, exchange rates?
So for manufacturing overseas, one, and this is less even a soft cost, but lack of control. If you don't own the factory overseas where your product is being produced, and 95% of the time uh, you don't, they may have other interests. You may have intellectual property issues down the road. So, not being in control of what goes on day to day. That's a huge one, and one that I struggled with a lot over the years. Freight, freight volatility. And we saw this a lot during COVID. Pre COVID, we brought everything in by air freight. And somehow I earned the title of being the largest air freight exporter out of Lithuania. Never a title I thought I was going to have, but got there. And we paid about €1 a kilo in air freight costs, which pre-COVID was pretty good. At the peak of COVID, that went up to €10 a kilo. That was no longer commercially viable. Couldn't do it when you're transporting doors and windows, each one of which weighs hundreds of kilos. So that was one of the soft costs that the volatility therein, and we also saw that in ocean freight. That was something that you needed to pad your prices because you didn't know where things would be on the day you needed to ship. Time change. When you're working with a supplier overseas, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Asia, it upends your day. You're waking up early or you're staying up late. That has an impact on health, family life, well-being. It makes things a lot more challenging, and oftentimes it makes decision making longer because it's not like, oh, right now it's 11 a.m. I'm going to pick up the phone, call my production manager, tell him X. No, we got to do this. Oh, you're sending him an email, and then he's replying it the day after with other questions back and forth. That makes things a lot less efficient. So that time change, the travel overseas, is exhausting, time consuming, expensive. And lastly, when you run into issues, when you start having problems, because inevitably at some point you will have problems that need to be resolved and conflicts. And if you are working overseas in a foreign legal system, you are at a disadvantage. You're not as familiar with the legal system. You're playing on someone else's home turf. And that can be a major disincentive. That is a major hurdle to overcome. You're having to learn about a foreign country's legal system in a foreign language. Yeah, you can hire a local lawyer, but it's never going to be the same as if you're operating on your home turf. So you're at a major disadvantage when inevitably at some point there are conflicts, there are disagreements, something goes wrong. That's always going to be part of business relationships.
What's the most important thing that you've learned in your life?
Say the obvious. So many of the mistakes and misunderstandings that happen on a daily basis, whether it's in communication regarding project details or anything like that, for myself comes back to saying, oh, something goes wrong. And I'm thinking to myself, God, wasn't that obvious? How did they not realize that? And so coming back to it and reminding myself, say the obvious, state the obvious. Even if you don't think it needs to be said, it costs you virtually nothing to say it. So state the obvious because it will save you a lot of headaches down the road in those moments where it's obvious to you, it's not obvious to someone else. But if you say it, and even better, if you put it in writing, it's going to save you a lot of headaches.